There is no better way to start the day than a Paksimali and a properly made coffee. God, I make good coffee. And what makes coffee taste really good? A candy apple red cup. I'm about to power this up for the first time since that fairly extensive work I did on it. And you can always make a mistake. Even if you've done it 100 times, you can still make a mistake. A strand of wire or just a moment's lapse of concentration and you've got a short happening somewhere and then you've got to chase it. So to protect the amp and myself, I do a few things. For a start, I put in a smaller value fuse, fast blow. I'm going to start with 0 volts on my variac, which then goes into my current limiter. So if I've got a dead short, I'm hoping this will catch it first and I'll be able to see the current on this. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to have this on, correct? And I'm just going to get you to watch that voltage there and the current limiter. If we see anything going crazy, just call out for me. But first thing we should see happening, I don't think we're going to see much voltage happening until our tube rectifier warms up a bit. But we may see this come on. That's at 6.3 volts. So I did a fair bit of wiring work on the heater system. So that's going to be one good double check to see if that comes on. Oh yeah, what leads am I using? I'm using this brand of lead called Kaiwets, or Kaiwets, however you pronounce it. K-A-I-W-E-E-T-S. Really like them. They're a pretty soft lead and great for, measuring various points. But when you want to just clamp on something, that comes off. And it does make that sound. So I'll clip that clipping onto the first reservoir cap. And here we go. What we really want to be watching is that. Smoke, sparks, dull glow, voltage. My variac's at 61 volts. We're heading for 240 volts. Can't see any glow on my current limiter yet. That's coming up nicely. We're at 90 volts. I reckon we should start seeing something here. I reckon by the time we get to 120, it's 105. 115. Oh, here we go. I might just sit on 120 for a little while. See how far it goes. It's also good not to start screaming into the ear of these capacitors, the electrolytics that have been sitting comfortably asleep for weeks or months. All right, that's looking good. No sign of anything untoward. I'm going to continue up. 130 volts. 160. I probably won't get to 240 because I just got to make sure I don't go with no load. I've taken the 6v6s out to reduce the load. Just in case there is anything wrong with my work. I mean, I double check everything and I've done it a squillion times before, but man, you can still make a mistake. Okay, we're at 200 volts, 350. I'm really happy with that. Okay, so I'm going to now wind him back. I'm going to pull this on full current. Wind this back up again. So now I've only got protection of fuses in my variac, in my current limiter, and in the amp, which has still got a small fast blow in there. Okay, we're at 200 volts, 350. I'm really happy with that. Okay, so I'm going to now wind him back. I'm going to pull this on full current. Wind this back up again. So now I've only got protection of fuses in my variac, in my current limiter, and in the amp, which has still got a small fast blow in there. I've got 160 volts. Oop, 420. I'm at 210 volts here. That's as high as I'm going to go until I put some load on it through the 6v6s. But before I do that, I'm going to discharge these caps. I'm going to screw down the circuit board because I'm now happy that all that is fine. I'll put on my wire ties, test the tubes, and then we'll come back. You've heard the term lead dress, and that basically is not how neat the wires are, although it can be. It's more keeping the sources of noise away from the sources of signal. Wires carrying high current AC away from signal carrying wires. So here where we've done most of our work, I'm going to try and keep the heater wires bundled together, as I've done there. All of this is AC, so I can bundle this together pretty much as Fender had done it. That's fine. Now, we haven't been given much slack wire here. I like the way the heater wires go up and over rather than wrapping around the base of a tube, because these wires, the heater wires, they go from green to black and white there because they wanted to identify the polarity of the AC signal, which is correct. So how are you going to identify your signal carrying wires? Well, you got the plate here on pin 3, it's a blue wire. The other end of our newly installed 470 screen grids is obviously going to your screen. And that wire there on pin 5 is your signal carrying wire, and it's green. So here's our green wire, and just there, and another green wire there. So if we can keep our green wires, and they're running parallel to each other, which is exactly the wrong thing to do, but we haven't got any choice short of rewiring the whole thing. But it's amazing because, you know, the induced noise reduces the square of the distance. We just have to increase that distance between the hum carrying high current AC and the signal carrying current by a little bit, and it's just going to be better than it was. Obviously the factory's not going to do this because it just takes time. Alright, that's not bad. That's moved that bunch of AC carrying stuff away from that green wire, which is going down there, and that other green wire is going very close to that power switch. So can I... No, that's about the best I can do with that one. Well, nowhere near perfect, but we're aiming for better than stock. Same story here. So green once again is grid, and they're the ones we've got to protect most of all. Keep them away from noise carrying sources, which is basically going to be the heater wires. This one, V2, is not ideal because you can see the grid wire is coming in to pin 2, which is correct. And this is like a doubled up parallel tube for the reverb driver. And the other one, the other grid wire, comes to pin 7, which is correct. But look, its little journey, it comes and wraps itself past these heater wires. So one way of, another little thing we could do is move that. We can't go around that way, but what we can do is do a shortcut across from here to here and stay away from this black and white wire. Green wire there looks pretty good. Okay, so the only thing we can see with the preamp tubes is that reverb driver. Everything else looks okay. There's the new ground wire from the main filter caps going to earth here. I've definitely improved this ground. I've just got to remember to tighten that nut and bolt up. Instead of being a sheet metal screw, I've got a nut and bolt on there, and that's going to be tightened up really tight. I'll do it now before I forget. Yeah, okay. And I've got spring washers on there, and I've also taken a artificial centre tap rather, for my 200 watt balanced resistors, hum balanced resistors, which are underneath that heat shrink tubing. Also going to ground. Alrighty, I think that's about as good as we can do. Now let's check those power tubes. I'm loving my Maxi Matcher. I've had it for a couple of years now, and it's just great. It's much more modern. Don't have to calibrate it every year like I do with the other one. This will read us the transconductance and the plate current of the tube, and we just have to set it up. We got a little ready reckoner here, so I'm going to test these 6V6s. So I'm going to set the plate voltage to 400 volts, and I'm going to set the bias voltage to -36, which it is. And I've got my tubes in test socket 1 and 2. So the first thing we're going to check is plate current. Now he's conveniently given us a little check here. So we want to see that the plate current gets to at least 15, but not exceed 35. And we also want to see that our transconductance, which I've described in another video, if I can remember to find where it was, I'll give you a link to it. But transconductance is similar to gain, only it's how much current changes compared to control grid voltage. True gain is voltage to voltage or current over current. This is current over voltage. Hence the unit of measure is a rather odd millimhos, where it's a backwards and inverted ohm. Okay, tube number 1 is looking pretty good. So it'll get to 30. We're looking for 35 as a max. Oh, it's still going up. I'm going to leave it. I'm a bit concerned because they have both shown significant signs of heat stress. So I just want to make sure this thing doesn't ramp itself up to something over 35 and potentially getting into a red plating scenario. If there's anything untoward happening here, that little LED will come on to let us know that there's a fault. This is continuing to climb. By this stage, that's definitely would have settled. I'm starting to suspect that this tube is beyond its prime. Yeah, that is now starting to accelerate. No. You're gone, buddy. You're gone. Ouch, shit. There's a reason why it had all of these signs of heat stress. I don't know if you can see it, but the lettering's burned. We see this grey thing on the plate here. All right, let's try tube number 2. It's 21.8. Minimum is 21. I think this could be useful as a spare, but if we're going to replace one, we'll have to replace 2. Let's just get its transconductance, so I'll write that down, 21.8. Oops. And we want to see something over 3, and that's actually over, that's 3,000 in actual fact. Yeah, I think this tube's just tired. I think have it in the back of your box for an emergency spare if you get some red plating at a gig, but that's definitely not a keeper either, but a spare. Well, the day's finally arrived. The Weber speaker has arrived, and I'll show you that in a sec. I have just removed the Jensen speaker from the Princeton Reissue enclosure. And I don't want to sound like I'm bagging Jensen. I'm not. They make really fine speakers, and thank God they're here to continue that fine reputation of Jensen. And I know a lot of people say the Italian Jensens aren't as good as the American ones, probably, but I do know that they are really committed to getting the maximum quality they can out of it. The one that comes out of the Princeton Reissue is a C for ceramic 10 for the diameter, and R for, I can't remember what that's about, 8 ohm. And what do I like about it? Well, I don't like smooth cones because there are some people out there, I don't understand why, but they say they like speaker distortion. I suspect it's more a matter of they don't know what they're talking about. Amp distortion you can control. You can control it with a pedal, you can control it with your volume knob. Speaker distortion, you can't. If it's reached its limits and it's now, the cone is now flapping about uncontrollably, called cone cry, you can't control that. I don't like speaker distortion. And one way of controlling it is by ribbing the cone. A smooth cone is more likely to distort and go out of control than a ribbed cone. Another way of doing it is how heavily they are damped around its join around here. I can't remember what that last bit's called. They're pretty good speakers. Magnet's pretty small. You know, you think, oh, maybe that's enough for a 15 watt amplifier as the Princeton. Now let's have a look at the, hi Ignazio, you know I still love you. Here's the Weber speaker. I can tell you just by holding it up, it is way more solid. Check out the size of the magnet in comparison. Oh my God. I'll see if I can hold up this one. What a difference in magnet size and weight. I think this thing's going to sound huge. I think the owner is going to get a bit of a surprise as to the weight gain, but I'll tell you what, I think it's going to be worth it. I think this thing's going to sound massive. We opted for a lightly doped surround. Once again, ribbed coil. It's 1.5 inch voice coil. And even though it's rated at 25 watts, I don't think we're going to break this speaker up ever with a deluxe reverb. Oh, that's a 10 inch speaker, or anything. It's just massive. I reckon this thing's going to sound great. Stop talking, get it installed, prove it. Words are cheap. Do you want proof? Proof that I'm an idiot? I have it for you. I forgot that I also ordered, when I ordered the speaker from Weber, I ordered this, a copper cap they call it. I've been using these in my amps for years. It's basically a solid state rectifier, but I am 90% sure that underneath here are two fairly big dropping resistors. This one I got for this Princeton. It's what they call a, I don't know how to make that focus, a WZ, I guess that's Weber Z34, so that's equivalent to a GZ34. And this one that I've had for a while, it's a WU4G, so it's like a 5U4. The 5U4 has got a higher voltage drop, so I'm assuming larger resistors, than the GZ34. They also have one which is just a straight solid rectifier, no dropping resistors at all, in which case that's going to give you the fastest response. The more current you draw, the more voltage drop's going to be across those internal resistors, the greater the sag. Why am I an idiot? Because I set up that bias so accurately, but I did it with the tube rectifier, because this hadn't arrived at that stage. So now I'm going to put in this WZ34, and if the voltage drop is significantly different, I'm going to have to do that bias all over again. I won't bore you with it, but just confirming that I am truly an idiot. All right, now this is with the original tube rectifier after I finished biasing it. We've got 457 volts for 6V6. That's high. In fact, our schematic says 440, which in itself is high, but it's definitely better than 456. So if we put in that Weber rectifier and it drops that B plus a little bit, I'd be happy. Even if it means having to rebias it again, it'd be worth it. Stay tuned, I'll do a quick swap and we'll have another check. All right, I've put the copper cap in. First thing you notice is the copper cap is significantly heavier than the tube. And because it's hanging upside down, like most Fender amps do, it's really important that we tighten those bear claws that hold the base of the tube in place, or else there's a risk of that heavier one falling out. Now, I've been using these copper caps, I forgot what they're called already, in my amps for a long time. I like them because solid state rectification does not need 5 volts. So it takes a whole bunch of load off your power transformer. It keeps it running cooler. That means it lasts longer. So that's probably the main thing I like about it. And it does its job of the sag, but I'm not a big sag person anyway. You may have seen my videos on tube amp sag, which I'll link here. You can have a look at that. The other thing is solid state rectification, even though it's got the dropping resistors, is fast. So a GZ34 ramps up quite slowly, which I like. But if you remember, we have that negative temperature coefficient NTC thermistor, which is going to slow that sudden application of power. It'll still be a lot faster, so keep your eye on that. It'll still be a lot faster than a GZ34, but not instant. And that's what makes life hard for capacitors and things following. All right, here we go. I reckon this will ramp up pretty fast. We want to make sure it's lower than, oh crap, I didn't write it down. What was it, 454 or something like that? We're going to hope it ends up a bit lower. Here we go. Look at that, way faster. Now that'll start to, and that's even with an NTC in there. It's going to drop now as these tubes start to conduct. Well, it's a little bit lower. So did it change the bias? Well, most people would say no, but if you suffer from OCD like I do, I tweaked it like half of a gnat's testicle to the right to get the bias exactly where I want it to be. I forgot to tell you that, well, you know your output transformer always needs a load. I know you know that. But did you know that your reverb transformer is also an output transformer? It's a single-ended output transformer which goes to your reverb tank. In fact, you can drive a little speaker off it. It'll put out about 1 watt or something like that. So I've got, I should have 3, here it is, still in the amp. So your reverb transformer wants to see a load on what goes into the reverb tank, because that's where your reverb transformer is, right? So when you have these reverb connections and they say reverb out, reverb in, it's as if it's the tank. So where you see reverb in, that's where your reverb transformer wants to see a load. And I've got a few different ones that I've made up. That one's a 10 ohm. That's a 1K ohm. And this one, very rarely used, is a 560 resistor, ohm resistor in there. And I just plug those in according to what sort of reverb tank it is. The most common one that most Fender use, it's got a really low input resistance, so I end up using my white one. Enough of that. That's fully biased. I'm just discharging the caps because when I put this back into the amp, into the cabinet, I don't want to get a zap because my fingers will stray into there, no doubt. And here is my constant companion. Harley, want a tummy rub? Tummy rub, tummy rub, tummy, tummy, tummy rub. And here's something else that's beautiful. I love the look of that copper cap. As I said, I've got them in, I think, all of my amps. I just love the whole concept of them. They work great, way more reliable than a tube. You still get some sag and no 5-volt load. That's its main plus. Okay, I've been having a bit of a fiddle around with this to see what sounds I like. So I've got the volume on 5, treble on 7, bass on 3, reverb off, speed and intensity off. I've got my Shure Beta 57 pointing parallel to that cone, halfway between the dust cap and the edge. That's where I like it. From there it's going into my Zoom H4n. Then I'll record that, and then I get a bit of flack for this, but this room's a cube. It's got frequency bumps at about 200 and 800 hertz. So I put them through my Studio One program, just cut those frequencies a little bit, and I like to compress it for a couple of reasons. One is I don't trust YouTube to compress the sound the way I want it compressed, so I do it and send it up to them compressed. That's one. And I also use 2 different mics when I'm recording my blah blah during these videos. This one, which goes straight into that camera, and I've got another Rode mic up there, which is just pointing at me, so it's a shotgun mic. So they sound a little bit different, their levels are a little bit different, so by using compression, I equalize them. Why am I explaining all this? Because people are critical of all silly things like this. But what I'm trying to do is present the amp in its most realistic way to you. I'm not trying to, gloss anything over. This is the most realistic sound I can do, and that's by just EQing it and compressing it the way I think it's a fair representation. I ended up pulling it apart again, and I increased that resistor, the one that was from 1 meg to 330K. I ended up increasing it a bit because the way that wobbly bias works is it takes the output tubes from good bias to almost off. And I think 330K just took it a bit too far, and I think the tube was actually turning off and distorting just before it turns off. So I've ended up increasing it to 560K, and we've now got this amazing throbbing reverb, tremolo rather. This is on 5. I've also slowed down the tremolos, you can probably hear. This is at 7. This is a 9, and I would say that's as bad as much as you'd ever go. This is 10. It's probably too much, so you just don't put it on 10, I think. That's a really nice, deep, growly, greasy, and that's on about 7. So tremolo sounds great. Reverb's nice and quiet. Every time I think of how am I going to demonstrate the amp I've just worked on to its best, I try and think of players that have used this, but it's so widespread, it's hard to narrow it down. So I know one of my mates, he's in a band called the Bondi Cigars, probably Australia's biggest blues band. And although he doesn't use a Princeton, he used to use a deluxe reverb. And Eben, the other guitar player, pretty sure he uses a Vibrolux. So, but they both use a really clean, on the edge of breakup sort of sound. Shane used to use a Telly, now they're both using Strats. I'm going to do a Bondi Cigars song. If you want to hear how it's done properly by the Bondi Cigars, I'll put a link down below. It's called Howling at the Moon. I hope you enjoyed that. It sounded fantastic, didn't it? Look forward to seeing you at the next video. Bye for now.